My impression from the summer school this year in Belgrade were good, were positive. There was a good group of students and participants. They were keen to learn. The topics were very relevant for them, judged by their willingness to respond and to tell their stories within the framework that we created. It was also hard work, intense. So overall, what it should be, summer school, you know, getting people new ideas, getting them to learn in a somewhat informal setting, and hopefully sending them to their life with some inspiration. The course that I offered the faculty was called The Politics of Land and Identity, State and Minorities in Conflict. And it was the idea for introducing the student to one of the most important core kind of areas around which conflict evolved, which is the geography of ethnic relations, or geography, identities, and power. And the two main angles were political geography and legal geography. And these two are quite intertwined. That is, issues of sovereignties, borders, land ownership, distribution of settlements, and of course the whole idea of who controls all this, and with the volatile history of partitions and post-partition, and colonialism and post-colonialism. And the approach I used was very comparative, because my own studies, my own research has usually looked sideways. Sometimes I drill into depth historically, but usually I look at comparative patterns. And in that, I look at other ethnic state or ethnocratic state, as I call them in my writing, such as Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Cyprus, Lebanon, Estonia, and of course Serbia is one of them, although in Serbia and in the Balkans I'm more of a student rather than a teacher. I've done research also on Northern Ireland, on Australia in the 19th century, which was very much an ethnocracy vis-a-vis the indigenous people. And we looked comparatively at various government structures, at various histories, at the way minority-majority relations change over time. And then in the latter part, we looked at new angles for conflicts which are not so familiar to the people here. First, indigenous people and their rise in the last 20 years around the world. And second, the whole issue of conflict in cities, and cities becoming absolutely the hub of conflicts, and we elaborated quite a lot about the urban issues. My faith, I suppose, in comparative approach is based on a philosophical, epistemological stand. This is how we know things, human beings, and this is very, very imperative on us to compare. We wouldn't know who is tall until he or she stand next to someone that is shorter than them, right? Or I usually use in some of my early articles the idea of the Pisa Tower. If we stand inside the Pisa Tower, it doesn't look crooked, right? Only when we go outside and compare it to other buildings, it looks crooked. So in order to understand, to fathom phenomena, we must compare them, and we must break them into elements that are comparable. And of course, comparison can quite often be contrast. It doesn't have to be similar. But if we break down and we expose the components that actually drive the change, the dynamics, then we can compare points where things have changed, points where the hegemony actually managed to maintain its power. And in that respect, I think it's very, very valuable. But I will add, it's not an exclusive methodology. Going back to the Tower of Pisa, once we realize that it's crooked, we also need to dig into the foundations to find out why it's moving, right? So we also need history. We also need to be enmeshed in the local cultures and meanings. So it is a combined approach, I would say. Comparative approach with a lot of attention and detail to also the various societies. And nothing I loathe more than, some expert, usually from the United States or Britain, that comes and says, we have a formula for you how to resolve this conflict. Do A, B, and C, and it will work okay. It already worked in Vietnam, right? So I oppose this approach. Comparisons have to be done with enough sensitivity to also know our limits. They're very, very helpful, but at the end, when we think about transforming, say, a conflict situation, we must also enmesh ourselves with the local culture and players. And they don't think comparatively, right? They think about their own territory, their own power structure, their own tribes, or whatever. So we have to combine the two. It is my first visit to Belgrade, and I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm also an urbanist, and I took my time 2 days to do what we call flaneuring. That is to go without a map in the city and just roam until you get lost. And when you get lost and you don't know where you are, as Walter Benjamin taught us, then you start to sensitize and to understand the city, because you're not worried about yourself anymore. And you sit and you observe and you see the different types of people and the way the build structure relates to the human activity, and also the ugliness and the poor. And so I'm pleasantly surprised. There is in the starry Belgrade, there is a sense of urbanity, a sense of community too. To some extent, I saw the people quite similar to the Ashkenazi Jews where I come from. They sort of remind me of the people I grew with, the Polish Jews, the Russian Jews, the Eastern European Jews. That in Israel they're considered to be Westerners, but in Europe they're Easterners. And that's quite a nice feeling. The other thing, of course, on a slightly larger scale is that the Balkans and the Middle East are very similar in many ways. The political geography and the legal geography and the struggles are very similar. So I wasn't in Belgrade before, but I was a couple of times in Sarajevo and of course in Greece and Bulgaria and other places. And I sense again, I smell again the Balkans, and for me it's familiar. Some people from other regions think they are disasters. Ours are disaster regions, but we know from inside there's a lot of life and beauty despite the conflict. So I sensed this here as well, and enjoyed it. The experience was also good here in terms of the way people were interested also in activism. And I think that's something that should be fostered, that summer school are not just about reading 4 more articles by great scholars and learning more theories, but exactly trying to find this bridge between the real world, the attempt to change it, and scholarly knowledge. And that is what's exciting about it. And I felt it here. I felt that that's happening here. You're definitely on the right track.